Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, checking your bank account and finding an extra $2,000 deposited, no strings attached. Now imagine that the person behind this deposit is none other than Donald J. Trump, announcing in October 2025 a brand new round of direct cash stimulus checks. But here's the real question. Why now? Why would Trump, a man whose name is already synonymous with the largest stimulus checks in American history back in 2020, return to this exact strategy 5 years later? Is this a genuine act of economic relief, or a desperate attempt to stabilize a financial system that may already be crumbling from the inside? Stay with me, because the truth behind these checks is far stranger than the headline. And once you understand the chain of events that led to this moment, you may never look at government spending or your own bank account the same way again. To understand October 2025, we have to go back, not just to the pandemic years of 2020, when the first stimulus checks of $1,200 per person shocked the nation, not just to the second and third rounds of checks in 2021, but to a deeper history, where the idea of government sending direct cash to citizens was once considered unthinkable. For decades, economists debated whether helicopter money, a phrase popularized by Milton Friedman in the 1960s, was a dangerous fantasy. The idea was that governments could print money and drop it, figuratively, from helicopters to stimulate the economy. Mainstream leaders scoffed. That was something third world countries did, not the United States of America, and yet by 2020, that taboo was broken. The COVID-19 pandemic created an emergency so severe that the U.S. government crossed a line it had avoided for over 200 years. Direct, repeated, large-scale payments to individuals. Fast forward 5 years. Inflation spiked in the early 2020s, cooled, then returned in waves. Debt ceilings were raised again and again. And now, in October 2025, Trump, having returned to the political stage with enormous force, is once again promising $1,000 to $2,000 checks for every American household. But here's the twist. This time, the justification isn't a virus. It's something far more systemic. Let's rewind to the origins of stimulus itself. The federal government has long had two main levers for influencing the economy: monetary policy, through the Federal Reserve adjusting interest rates, and fiscal policy, Congress passing spending bills. For most of American history, fiscal policy meant infrastructure projects, tax breaks, and corporate subsidies. Rarely, almost never, did it mean direct checks to citizens. But the global financial crisis of 2008 changed the mindset. The government bailed out banks and automakers with trillions in spending. Average Americans noticed that corporations got rescued while households were left to fend for themselves. Seeds of distrust were planted, then came 2020, the pandemic. Within weeks, unemployment skyrocketed, markets collapsed, and panic spread. For the first time, Washington realized that a purely corporate bailout wouldn't work. They had to go directly to the people. And thus, the first $1,200 checks arrived. Cause and effect. The taboo was broken. And once a taboo is broken, it's never truly restored. By 2021, Americans were receiving their third round of checks, now $1,400 each. Polls showed overwhelming bipartisan support. Left and right alike approved of the government giving back to taxpayers. At the same time, however, inflation began to rise. Critics warned that flooding the economy with trillions of dollars would overheat the system. The Federal Reserve, which had kept interest rates near zero for more than a decade, began hiking aggressively. Here's the irony. The very thing meant to stabilize households, stimulus, helped destabilize the economy long term. Prices rose, savings from stimulus eroded, and the checks once spent left no lasting wealth. But psychologically, Americans had been trained. The idea that the government could send money directly had become normalized. Once you give people a taste of free money, expectations change permanently. That brings us to Trump in 2025. So why is Trump announcing $1,000 to $2,000 checks now? The official explanation is simple: rising household costs. Despite temporary dips, inflation never fully disappeared. Housing affordability is at record lows. Credit card debt has surpassed $1.5 trillion. Student loans restarted, straining budgets, and global instability, from oil shocks to supply chain disruptions, has kept prices elevated. But unofficially, there's a deeper motive. October 2025 is a politically charged moment. The U.S. is entering another election cycle. Polling shows Americans overwhelmingly distrust institutions, Congress, the Fed, Wall Street banks, and once again the economy feels fragile. By announcing direct checks now, Trump accomplishes several things at once. He positions himself as the champion of the forgotten man, echoing his 2016 messaging. He injects $500 billion to $1 trillion directly into households, temporarily propping up consumer spending. And he controls the narrative. Instead of talking about debt crises or market instability, the news cycle is dominated by one phrase: Trump gives you money. But this breaking point reveals a deeper truth. America has quietly shifted from capitalism to something else, a hybrid system where crises are constantly patched with direct cash infusions. Now, here's the part few headlines will tell you. These stimulus checks don't come without consequences. First, inflationary pressure. More money in circulation chasing the same goods risks reigniting price spikes. Even if households cheer the checks, grocery bills and rent may rise shortly after. Second, national debt. The U.S. debt in 2025 is already north of $36 trillion. Adding another trillion in stimulus pushes borrowing costs higher. The government now spends over $1 trillion annually just on interest payments. Third, psychological dependency. Every time stimulus is used, it reinforces the idea that government can and should fix economic pain with direct payments. This undermines long-term structural reform, like tackling healthcare costs, housing shortages, or wage stagnation. In short, stimulus checks feel good in the moment, but like painkillers, they don't cure the disease, they mask it, and each dose must be larger than the last to have the same effect. This isn't the first time nations have gone down this road. History gives us clear warnings. In ancient Rome, emperors handed out grain doles and cash to placate the masses. It worked, until the empire's finances collapsed under its own weight. In 20th century Latin America, direct subsidies became a cycle of temporary relief followed by inflation and currency crises. Argentina's peso was devalued multiple times because of this pattern. Even in modern Japan, repeated stimulus payments and government borrowing led to decades of stagnation, what economists call the lost decades. Cause and effect is clear. When leaders rely on handouts instead of structural change, economies may survive in the short term but weaken in the long run. So is the U.S. repeating the same mistakes? The October 2025 announcement suggests we might be. Let's connect this to today with some numbers. Household savings. During the 2020-2021 stimulus era, U.S. savings rates briefly soared to 33%. By 2025, savings rates have collapsed below 4%. In other words, Americans are more financially fragile today than before stimulus began. Debt explosion. Total consumer debt has hit records across every category: mortgages, student loans, auto loans, credit cards. Stimulus temporarily plugs holes, but debt keeps climbing. Inflation cycles. Prices rose 9% in 2022, fell back to 3% in 2023, then surged again in late 2024 due to global conflicts and oil shocks. Checks may fuel the next surge. Generational divide. Millennials and Gen Z now openly expect stimulus as a recurring feature of government policy. Older generations, however, worry about debt burdens. This generational clash shapes elections. The pattern is undeniable: short-term relief, long-term consequences, and growing public expectation of more. So, what does this all mean for you right now in October 2025? Let's break it down into three key takeaways. First, stimulus is no longer an emergency measure. It's becoming permanent policy. Whether you support or oppose Trump, the normalization of direct payments has transformed American economics. The precedent is set. Second, relief comes with hidden costs. The $1,000 to $2,000 you may receive is not free. Inflation, taxes, and debt burdens ripple through the system. The cost is spread across time and generations. Third, you must prepare for volatility. Don't assume these checks will secure long-term stability. Use them wisely. reduce debt, build savings, or invest. Because history shows the cycle of stimulus and inflation rarely ends cleanly. And here's the warning: America is entering uncharted territory. The repeated use of direct checks combined with skyrocketing debt could reshape the financial system itself. The dollar's role as the global reserve currency, the future of interest rates, even the survival of certain institutions, all are now in question. So the real question for you is this: what will you do with this information? Will you treat these $1,000 to $2,000 checks as quick spending money, or as a signal to prepare for deeper change? If you found this video thought-provoking, don't just scroll away. Subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden forces shaping our economy. Leave a comment. Do you see Trump's announcement as genuine relief or a dangerous gamble? And remember, the check may clear tomorrow, but the bill always comes due.